Good morning. My name is Keith, and I'm the senior pastor. And I'm excited that we get to be together today and that we get to come to this table surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Our text is a scripture text that is often chosen for All Saints' Day from John chapter 11. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said to them, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the word of God for the people of God. So All Saints' Day was actually on Thursday, November the 1st, and today is All Saints Sunday. All Saints is a day that is full of memory. It's really a day that we remember that we're not alone. My mom and dad are at the beach for the month of November fishing. I'm not sure how much fishing my mom is doing, but she's with my dad. And this is kind of a new tradition in that my dad and his first cousin Randy, they rent, and sometimes his first cousin Dewey, who is Randy's brother, they rent this house at Cherry Grove Beach for the whole month of November, and they just fish. Like, all they do is fish and eat fish. And the tradition started a long time ago, way back, when my granddaddy, my dad's dad, wanted to find something to do for his brother, Joe, Randy and Dewey's dad. Uncle Joe was an alcoholic, and we know about that. You've got to have people, and you've got to have activity and stuff to do, and so they dreamed up this idea of, well, we'll just go fishing. And so every spring and every fall, there would be this trip to some beach on the North Carolina coast, and all they would do for 3 or 4 days is just fish. They'd get up early and fish. If the fish were biting at 3 in the morning and it was raining, they'd still be out on the pier or on the surf. If they weren't sleeping in the motel, they were or on the pier or on the surf, they were in a cafe drinking really strong coffee. Well, when I was a kid, I got to a certain age where I was invited to come along, and so I have all these memories of these spring and fall fishing trips where all we would do is fish. And I remember sitting on the pier, and I remember my granddaddy, just sitting on one of those benches on the pier and smoking his pipe and usually smiling. I don't remember us catching a whole lot of fish, but my Uncle Joe, he, by lunchtime, would know everybody on the pier. And you could sometimes hear him all the way down at the end of the pier just laughing and getting to know new people. And he'd sneak up behind you while you were fishing and flick your line so that you think you had a bite. And then, when you followed through on that, he would just laugh and laugh. In the cafe, Uncle Joe liked his coffee really strong, but also really hot, like almost boiling. And so he would tease the waitress about his coffee, and he'd just laugh and he'd laugh. When Ben was a baby, he was just tiny. I mean, he's 28 years old now. Chan wanted to go on the fishing trip with me, and so we brought Ben along. And there was one morning after breakfast, we were going to go out and fish on the surf, and it was kind of a nasty day. It was a little rainy, and the wind was blowing. It was kind of cold, and I was a little bit surprised. But Chan really wanted to go out with me to fish, and so Uncle Joe was like, "Well, I'll keep the baby." Now Uncle Joe's a big guy, and always wore like just blue coveralls, just a one-piece coveralls, and we kind of looked at him like, "Do you know what to do with a little baby?" And we showed him the diapers and the bottle stuff, and just kind of looked out the corner of our eyes. We were leaving the motel room with big Uncle Joe, holding little Ben, just laughing. A couple years ago, my son Joey and I went down to Cherry Grove and fished for a day with my dad. Joey got to fish with his granddaddy, or his papa is what he calls him, and we actually caught some nice trout on that trip. And I'm going to go down there this week. I'm going to go down on Thursday. Hopefully I'll get there in time to fish a little off the dock where the house on the canal is, but the plan is just that I'm going to be in the boat all day Friday and just fish with my dad and with my dad's cousin, Randy. Randy's the guy who owns the boat. Somebody will inevitably tell fishing stories from this great and long tradition. And there's always just something like, you remember when Uncle Joe, and then fill in the blank. And he knew how to laugh. And we would remember, he sure laughed a lot. And just the memory of him would make us laugh. And I know that he'll be in the boat with us. When Scott Taylor and I were talking about today's service, he said, the people for whom these candles burn are no longer with us. They're not here anymore, but they're not gone either. A part of them remains with us, and we're not alone. Our gospel story is a dramatic demonstration of Jesus' power over life and death, and it's kind of a long story, and we just read parts of it. We picked up the story when Mary comes out to meet Jesus after Jesus called for her, but before Mary comes to Jesus, Martha hears that Jesus is coming, and so she goes out to him, and she says, "Lord, if you had gotten here in time, my brother wouldn't have died." And what ensues is this conversation about life and death and resurrection. And N.T. Wright, in his commentary about this story, he kind of reminded me that what they were talking about, because Jesus' response to her was, "Your brother will rise again." And she kind of says, "Well, yeah, I know this." That was the standard Jewish teaching about the future resurrection that most Jews in their time believed. And it was this vision from Isaiah. And the language of it is very similar, I think, to the language that we use if you grew up in Christian tradition. But it's this vision of Isaiah 65 and 66 of a new heaven and a new earth. And that God's new world is going to be a whole lot like our world, except that everything beautiful will be enhanced. And everything that's painful and ugly, our grief and all that goes with it, will be abolished. And so that day is coming. And with that new world, what Jesus and Martha were talking about and what the Jews of their day believed, and what we claim too, is that all of God's people from ancient times to the present will be swept up in that, and will be given new bodies, and will be able to share and relish the life that's going to be this new creation. And so Martha believes this, but her response to Jesus is kind of flat in verse 24 of chapter 11, which kind of reveals that at this moment, what they're saying isn't all that comforting. And I think maybe we feel that sometimes. We have our convictions and we have our beliefs, but in times of pain and grief and confusion and fear, it still bites a little bit, Well, she's not prepared for Jesus' response. Because what he's saying, and actually what's happening, is this future is bursting into the present time. Like the new creation that's coming, and with it the resurrection, which is in Jesus. It's come forward, and it's being experienced right in the middle of time. So I wanted to share what N.T. Wright said. He says Jesus has not just come from heaven to earth. He's come from God's future into the present, into the mess and muddle of the world we know. I am the resurrection and the life, he says to Martha. Resurrection isn't just a doctrine. It isn't just a future fact. It's a person. And here he is standing in front of Martha, teasing her to make the huge jump of trust and of hope. So then we picked up the story where Mary comes to Jesus. And Mary comes, and when she sees Jesus, she knelt at his feet. And she said to him, Lord, if you had just been here, my brother would not have died. Well, this time there is no theological conversation about death and dying and resurrection. John tells us that when Jesus saw her weeping and the crowd weeping with her, that he was greatly moved. And that he was deeply disturbed. And that Jesus started crying. It's interesting to imagine that. And I don't know, this was important for me. As I was reading this text and living with this text these days, I assume that it's important for you too. That Jesus is deeply disturbed and deeply moved by our pain. So it's kind of like, with him standing in front of Martha and says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. He says that to us. There's life in me. And I think what happens when we're in the presence of Jesus is that all of a sudden Jesus reveals God's love to us. He consistently makes this promise. When you read through the story in the New Testament, to his disciples, he says, I'm going to be with you to the end of the age. And there's a time where he says, I'm leaving you, and it freaks them out a little bit. I'm going to this place. You're not going to see me, but I'm not going to leave you alone. He promises not to leave them alone. And so in our story, with all this crying going on, Jesus just simply asked the question, where have you laid him? Where have you laid your brother Lazarus? And so the crowd says, well, come and see. And it kind of reminds us of how John starts his gospel. In John chapter 1, a couple of John the Baptist's disciples see Jesus coming, and they approach Jesus, and they say, we want to know where you're staying. It was another way of saying, we'd like to hang out with you today. And Jesus' response to their question was, come and see. And so they did. They followed him, and they went to where he was staying, and they spent the day with him. And they were not the same. Their lives were transformed, and they were different, and they came back to their friends and said, we found him. Well, we start our confirmation class every fall with that text from John chapter 1. This story of the disciples approaching Jesus and saying, where are you? We want to know you. And Jesus says, come and see. Because that's kind of what our confirmation, that's what our whole year is about, is this curiosity of who is Jesus? And is there hope for me in him? And so we're going to spend this entire year with that kind of, following after, saying yes to Jesus' invitation to just come and see. So when we invite Jesus to come and see, we invite him into our grief and into our pain. I think even we invite him into our tomb. Like Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and so there was a serious stench. And I don't know what our stench is, and I don't know how strong it is. It might not be quite that bad, but it's there. And when I invite Jesus to come and see, in part, it's opening up all of my wounds, whatever they are. When Jesus invites us to come and see, he takes us to where he is. And where he is a place of light and a place of love, and it's a place of hope, a place where we experience resurrection glory. We end our commitment series, sermon series today. We've talked these last 5 weeks about our commitment to pray, our commitment to be present, our commitment to give and to serve. And then there's our commitment to be a witness. If I'm going to be a faithful follower of Christ, I'm faithful to all of these things. I think that the only way for me to be a witness is to witness something of God's power in Jesus. Jesus has the power to unbind us, to take the cloth from our eyes, and to set us free. This communion table is God's invitation for us today to come and to see again. And all of you are invited. Amen.